I think we're good now. Thank you very much. Sorry for the
Thank you.
delay.
That's fine. Madam Clerk, would you call a roll call, please?
Denham. Here. Skanes.
Here.
Cooper. Here. Milton.
Here.
Benton.
Here.
Whitus.
Here.
Z. Here. Your Honor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we start the meeting, I would like to introduce and welcome Jim Meadows. He is our interim city attorney as we seek to fill the position permanently. Jim has been doing some contract work for the city for 20 years or a long period of time. So he's familiar with a lot of the ins and outs of the city, and we want to welcome him. And thank you, Jim. Appreciate you being here. On the agenda, we have a discussion regarding separate fees related to ordinance 22-30 and 78-119, presented by Jamie Roush.
Mr. Mayor, before we get started, I have an interest in this topic. I've been advised to recuse even from discussion of it, so with that, I'm going to recuse myself from the meeting.
Fair enough. My granddaughters are waiting for me. Could I recuse? No. No legal opinion on that one.
That's code for Jamie. Don't be
Hurry up.
long-winded.
No problem here.
Go ahead,
You ready
Jamie.
for me?
Yes.
This is really just a code discussion. So currently, on our books, the code section 22-30, separate license required for each address at which a business entity operates. A separate license shall be obtained for each address at which a person conducts, operates, maintains, processes, manufactures, and carries on business activities or provides services. So I will start off by saying, for almost all other businesses, we do this, with the exception of nightly rentals. And I would like to say that this code's been in place for quite some time, and so when the nightly rentals got up and running, I can give you the history. I'm working on my 14th year here, so I have been here for quite some time, and the way that it is actually done for nightly rentals is different from the way it says that we're in code. So all other business licenses are done per location. Nightly rentals, the way they are done currently, the way we currently practice is most of them have management companies, and so the management companies get a license, and then they come in and then they list all the locations that are underneath that. They pay one license fee, they pay one tourism tax deposit because that management company is responsible for that. And that's how we work. And so it's not by location. It is by management company. We do track the property locations that come in, and so we do have a good workbook of the separate locations that we have on file. Just to give you a little bit of an idea, currently we have about 386 nightly rental licenses, but about 1,257 locations, give or take. And we know there's others out there. So that just gives you some kind of an estimate of what we're talking about. However, if you look at this code and if you think about the nightly rentals that we have, some of them have more than 300 locations per business. And so we just didn't want to just implement that. And if you think about the dollar value that each business would have to pay, so if you think about a $50 business license and you extrapolate that across 310 locations for one business, obviously the expense for that business is going to greatly increase. So this is a discussion for you all to have, or do you want us to implement the current code as is, which will require each location to have a business license, pay that business fee, an inspection, a tourism tax deposit, and depending on if they're upgrading their sewer connection to commercial, they'll have to pay that one-time fee as well. Or would you like for us to look at modifying the code and maybe possibly setting a separate fee schedule for nightly rentals, or looking at some other avenues of which we should take it? That's really what the discussion is about today.
Thank you, Jamie. When I was first introduced to this issue, it seemed really unfair to have a code on the books for more than 10 years. Is that fair?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, so have a real old code, and then on this day, we're gonna say, oops, now we haven't been enforcing it, now we are, write me a check for $200,000. So I don't know if I heard the sewer hookup fee, I don't know if there's issues with fire. I guess initially what I would lean towards is we just simply can't go back and enforce this. I think the choices are, if we choose, we could start enforcing this on a certain date. I don't know if that would take a code amendment or something. Or, as you suggested, come up with something that is a more reasonable fee structure for nightly rentals.
She needs to list those fees one more time. I forgot what they were.
What's that?
Those fees, I forgot what they all were. The fees.
What are the fees?
Okay, the fees for business licenses, 0 to 2 is $50. 0 to 2 employees, rather, I should say. 0 to 2 employees is $50, and 2 to 5, it goes up by $25 every 5 employees, okay? So all the way up to a maximum of 300. 51 employees and over just pays a maximum of $300 for that license.
Did you get that, Alderman Gaines?
Yes, sir.
So in addition to, is this strictly about license fees, or are there sewer hookup fees, fire inspections?
So it depends on which way you go, but currently, if we are going to enforce the code that's on the books by location, it depends on if they have to upgrade to a commercial connection, they will be required to pay a one-time $400 sewer connection fee. Then they will be required for nightly rentals. It's almost always $50 a license because it's 0 to 2 employees. Management companies typically have that. So if you think about $50 per location for the business license, then a potential $400 for a one-time connection fee hookup, and then their tourism tax deposit as well by location.
And Jamie, did you say that you, currently, it is by location on everything other than nightly rentals?
It is,
So that is
yes.
happening currently?
Yes, sir. Sure is.
Jamie,
And if we're going,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Stan.
Jamie, could you give them kind of a, because I'm kind of, I'm not asking for a specific dollar figure, but kind of a, what one nightly rental property would cost under the process that we currently have in place right now?
Yeah, that'd be good.
We did some analysis and this, we did some on some of the larger ones because over the past, like I said, this is my 14th year and we have tried 2 times since I've been here to get the nightly rentals and implement by location, and it just didn't work out for us. So roughly, if you think, let's talk about 300 locations, it increases their business license fee alone around $16,000, give or take, on an annual basis. Plus, they would be responsible for a tourism tax deposit by location, which increases that greatly. And then they would be responsible for those connection hookups. And we estimated it for the first year would be about $172,000 versus a $350, $400.
For one business with 300 locations?
Yes, and that is like the highest level of example that we could give you. So you have all different levels. So you have some that only do 7, right? Or you have some that do 400. You have some that do 60. So, I mean, that would vary greatly. That was just one very large example for you. But I wanted to share that. You know, some may only have 2 and it wouldn't impact them as greatly. So it kind of ranges all over the board. But we just wanted to provide some of those numbers so you could see what we're up against.
And we're talking let's say this company has 20 cabins, 20 2-bedroom cabins. Each cabin would have to be licensed.
Every location, yes. So, and if you can imagine, that also puts a lot more burden on the staff, whether it is inspecting now or processing. Right now, you're processing 386 licenses, just with the current numbers today, versus 1,257. That's an example for you. 1,257 licenses. Those kind of things are things that we typically think about. That's why we wanted to bring it before you for discussion today. It's basically what y'all want and how you want to direct us.
Are there things to take in consideration other than the licensing fees per location? For example, today, does our fire department inspect every nightly rental property?
They don't do renewal inspections. For new inspections, they will. So if it's a new business, a new location on the books, they will inspect it. But for renewals, they don't. So typically, there's a lot more, obviously, renewals than new ones. So that's how we work it today.
Is there any consideration for sewer hookup fees? Because I'm hearing that, I mean, I think, a bunch of nightly rentals where they sleep 20, 30 people. And obviously, the sewer demand on that would be different than a single-family residential.
So if they're switching to commercial, it would be $400 per location. So that would be pretty steep too. And we can look at whatever y'all's desire is. That's what we're up here for, is to say, what direction do you want us to take, essentially?
Ted, I don't know if you're prepared to discuss this with us.
Come on up.
Just for some background, as Jamie mentioned, we will do the initial inspection for a new license. We do randomly spot check other properties throughout the year based on the hazard, as we have manpower available to do so. So there is a possibility of getting into that. And do they have to do health department annually? Is that lodging licensed on the VRBOs? So the health would do that as well annually for a VRBO. So it may be something that we could, if I could throw a suggestion out, is talk about an escalator too. But the main thing is that the biggest topic that we've talked about internally is if we have a problem with, if I own 10 properties and it's on one license, and property 9, I just failed to fix the fire alarm or a sprinkler system or a stairwell. The stairwells are the biggest issues with our rental properties for egress. I've got to go after the whole license to stop the work or to stop. So that's why we've talked about individual. Then we caused a red flag in the finance world. So it had a little bit of ripple effect. So to go back to, I'm speaking loosely, if we had a way to come back and just explore this to help the customer out, but also help us out, whether it's license 1, and then a 1A, 1B, 1C, so we could target one property.
Yeah.
May be a way to do that. But also, if I'm speaking loosely for a minute, she hasn't kicked me yet. I do understand the bigger numbers, but I also understand that if John Doe owns one property, he charges $100 a night, here's your fees. If Jane Doe owns 10 properties, $100 a night, that's $1,000. So that's escalating too on revenue. And so I don't want to shortchange the work that your city staff does just because they own 10, 20, 30, 40 properties. So that's where the escalator may come into play.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe, my first thought was maybe it's a tiered system so that.
That's a better term.
So that you're, oh, is that what you said?
That's what he said.
Oh, okay. You just used a different word I didn't understand. So what you're saying, like, you own 10 condos, it's this fee. If you own 15, it's this fee. If you own 20, it's this fee. So they're not getting hammered.
We've discussed that. So that's one area, or you can do it by revenue. Instead of by employees, you can do that, and then you can look at the license fee and then look at the location. Gulf Shores, we did look at some other areas, some other tourism areas. What Gulf Shores does is they do license by location, but inspections they do every 3 years. So it wouldn't be as big of a burden on inspection-wise. It would still be the fee there, but you could offset. There's different ways to do it. Thank you, Ted.
Do you have something to share?
I do, Mayor, thank you. So a little bit more on the sewer fees. I'd like to give a little bit better explanation on that. So we got a couple things we're looking at here is one, if, I'm going to give you a quick scenario. So typically what we'll see is a condo come in, a unit that is wanting to change from what would be classified as a residential to a nightly rental, and with an individual water meter. So what we have to do is when that business license come in, we look at the history of the property. We see if it's ever been considered a commercial property in the past. That basically we could assess a credit to the property that it is already paid for a system connection charge. But if it hasn't, then two things take place. One, the address, the user fee, so your monthly user rate should change from residential to commercial because, again, you're making that a commercial property by turning it into a nightly rental. And then the other thing is the system connection charge. So system connection charge is a one-time fee that is assessed to properties based on their use and meter size. So, for example, we have a code in section 90-81 of the system connection charges that anytime a property either changes or requires a connection or changes the size of the connection, like a larger water meter, or changes the use, we assess a system connection charge, whether it's water or sewer. So if it's in the City of Branson water system, it's a $500 additional fee is what we, connection charge is what we typically see because it's a 3/4 inch meter for an individual nightly rental, plus $400 for, as Jamie mentioned, for the sewer connection charge. So there's a $900 total there on system connection charges when it's within the city's water system. Now, if it's in District 3 or Missouri American, then it's just the $400 sewer system connection charge on that. So if we decide not to charge the system connection charges, then we need to change code in that section 90 section as well for nightly rentals specifically.
Sure.
But
What is, just ballpark, the difference for a residential water sewer user fee for usage compared to commercial? Different rate per thousand?
are you looking for like a price per 1,000 gallons of water
Yeah,
or?
something. I mean, is it double if it's commercial than residential?
I wouldn't say double. I mean, probably a third more or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I would like to hear from the board is the initial question on the table of, this is a code that's on the books, and so big picture, we have a choice of implementing the way it's written, or possibly implementing it beginning a certain date, not going back, or rewriting the code to make it more specific for nightly rental properties. And if we went the route of asking to customize this for this use, because, I mean, I think to me, it's pretty clear that these fees are really high. I mean, I could see it for commercial uses, but this is a nightly rental. But I also think there should be some additional fees versus a residential property. So I would ask Jamie, your department, to come up with recommendations based on all the different factors that are involved and customize something, and we'll see if we put that into code.
Yeah, I mean, if we do it as is, man, we filled some revenue gaps, but that's not right.
That's true, that's true.
I mean,
right.
so,
Yeah.
but I mean,
Agreed.
so I think the modifications of this will be the right way to go, and then we just kind of create something that's for this specific use. I think it's important twofold for proper sewer connection hookup and proper fire, especially because we're seeing lots of these being built now too, and so being able to get ahead of that at this time would be great. And as far as a date-wise, I know business licenses are April, May, so I mean, if we can try to fit that timeline, that would be great to start it from that point on. That's just my thoughts.
And another thought, when we go to modify this, maybe that product, because there's so many of them, it's 1,257, because there's so many of them, maybe they don't fit in that March, April timeframe. Maybe they fit in the August, September, or a different timeframe. And possibly, instead of annual inspections, every 2 or 3 year inspections.
Yeah, I think a tiered system would be great.
Yeah. Are these properties sprinkled? Is that a requirement?
Probably
They're required to have a fire suppression system, are they not?
Anything new construction is required to have the automatic fire sprinkler system and fire alarm. Existing properties, I'll give you two different examples. Say at Fall Creek Resort or Point Royale, there are properties that have been zoned this way for quite some time, built back in the late 80s, early 90s, that are not. And we don't have it in our code to require that. The only way that the requirement changes occur is if, say, someone takes a house in a properly zoned area, a single-family home, now you change your use group from a single-family home to a commercial property, then the codes can be applied. So you would see retrofitting done in that application only.
We would see.
Yes.
Would there be a situation like in remodel, like in my business world, in the business, when there's a new infill, like maybe a store that came in the late 90s, doesn't meet certain fire codes, but they're grandfathered in, but when they come in to do a new infill or something, that's when they come up to code?
Grandfather doesn't work in fire life safety, but sorry, Jeff, we've used that term for years, right?
Existing non-compliant.
Yeah, thank you. It would only be if we had a use group change it was going to be built under the existing code, whether it be the 90 series or 2000 series, unless you had a use group change in zoning, that would cause that change.
And real quick before you disappear, let's just go back to the beginning and tell me about inspections, annual inspections for fire alarm, fire sprinkler, and fire extinguishers in the city, as if I've never heard it.
Yeah, those inspections are required by the International Fire Code, and most of the vendors are well aware of that. We've done some self-inspection programs, we've done spot checks, we've done things on our website or social media posts, just to remind people that those are required to be inspected annually by a third-party vendor. Fire extinguishers, fire alarms, fire sprinklers, backflow prevention in Kendall's world is a big one as well.
So when we start talking about inspections every 3 years before you're going to confirm or validate these?
That's what we would be doing, but we also look at egress, emergency lights, exit lights, fire extinguisher replacement, things that happen. And probably one of the biggest factors that we see in some of the multifamily dwelling units would be the stairwells, the egress. We see a lot of decay on the walkways and the stairwells, the pans that hold the concrete or the metal pieces. We see a lot of that decay that might be 15 or 20 years old. So it really helps with with the new division across the hall here, partnership between health and code enforcement and fire and utilities. So hopefully it's not here comes a city, but here comes we're championing safety in our community overall.
So I know we get them on occupancy, new business, out of the ground, first-time operation. And then, I know that I think it's up to the vendors more to push this. No, you can't wait for 3 years. You have to do this every year. And
We are also looking at a company called Brycer Compliance Engine, and that will help us on labor internally. It's a company that the vendors will report to annually when those inspections are done. So it's a dashboard that we'll be able to see online. We'll be hopefully bringing that to you this year. There's no cost to the city, and it could be a small revenue generator. So, sorry. Get a high five or something, but it is a process that would help with compliance.
okay, so if you had a customer who had 10 and there was one structure that just was not doing it, not cutting it, not compliant, not following up on this stuff, you would have an issue you'd have to go after all 10 units under that one license? You can't peel this one off and
Currently,
deal
that's
with it
correct.
directly?
And yet we see the value to the owners that have multiple properties. So that's why Jamie brought this to you today is kind of what's that better way to do it in today's modern times.
Gotcha. Okay, that's it.
Mayor, could we get I'm a little confused on the issue of multiple properties. Because I get the issue like Thousand Hills, but let's say they have several of them around town. Those would be treated independently, but if they're all in a cluster, they would be treated as one. Am I right?
Not currently. So currently, let's just use an example, a management company comes in, they have the business license under that management company, and they list all of the locations that they currently manage, and we keep that in a database. But they are required to pay one license fee, and so I can think of some examples that they had 2 issues with possible inspections, but we could have revoked, or they would not have gotten their license for the entire 7, 8, 9 properties, whichever they have, because of those 2 issues. It's under one license. So if that one license, if all the properties don't line up, then yes. It doesn't matter if they're in a cluster or if they're all spread out. It just manages what license do they fall
I
under.
guess what I was trying to get to, one of them is out west 76, the other one's down 165, the other one's down 265. They have 3 properties, independent, physically removed by a mile, 2 miles. They're looked at as total.
If they have one management company, and that management company listed all of those underneath there, it would fall under one license, and we do have some examples like that, sure.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ted.
I think you just hit it, and that was our concern on the fire side is, I have a P.O. box. Good luck finding me where I live, right? I live out in the sticks. But same scenario what you mentioned. If it's a condo building with 12 units, it's 123 Easy Street, and we license all 12 units in that condo building. But if I own a condo building on Fall Creek Drive, Port Royale Drive, Turnberry, Berm Circle, how do I, if the address is ABC Management Company, P.O. Box 123, I can't get back to that address. That's where she's working hard to help with those management companies get the addresses physical tied back to a proper person.
There's always ways to skin the cat, isn't there?
Yeah, and this is going to take some time to work through. In fact, we probably want to have a study session to hear from the public also. But, you know, we could be opening up a can of worms if we're not careful. You have a McDonald's owner who has the rights for the area for Branson. They have a license for McDonald's. They have 3 different locations. Would this apply to that?
No, this is only nightly rentals. Any other business we license by location.
So is there a separation between nightly rental and apartments? 30-day rental, annual rental?
It's only nightly rentals that falls under the business license, so apartments don't really fall under
Where
that.
do apartments fall under?
Apartments we don't license apartments. Only if they have a management office on site, he said, so. So, I mean, that's another separate discussion, but yes, if you want us to bring that back as well, just let me know what you want me to do. We could possibly bring you back 3 different options to look at of, like I said, we looked at Gulf Shores, we looked at Myrtle Beach, we looked at some of the other major tourism areas that we know that the nightly rentals are going to be huge into. So we have those examples, and what we can do is bring you back 3 options. I know that's becoming common for me, and let you all say, hey, I like this option, or I like this option, or this applies more to Branson. You just let me know what you want me to do. I'll be happy to do that.
Well, I sure like that idea, is having you go back, because I do think that there'll be many tentacles that we're just not thinking about today. And so any member on the board agree to ask Jamie to come back with 3 solutions after this has been studied a little bit?
I totally agree. Find one we like and then tweak it, right? Because like Jamie said, you want this to be fair to those companies too. I mean, you're saying it's always been on the books, but we've never really enforced it.
The precedent was set way before I've been here to do the nightly rentals in this manner. And if you can tell, in the last 10 years, they're just sprouting up like crazy.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Anybody recall Chateau Cove?
I like the idea of bringing some other ideas in.
Okay,
I really do.
Alderman Denham?
I agree.
At another study session or just a board meeting?
Study session, I would think.
Session would
Okay.
probably work out.
Let's get some input.
Okay.
I would recommend that we put it together, a tentative, and then bring it back to study session and make sure we're going in the right direction.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do that.
Should that be in the form of a motion, or we just all
No.
agreed? Okay,
We just needed your direction. I think we've got it good.
that's the direction.
Jamie, was Keith's issue involved in this also?
Yes, Keith is coming up next because he has the second code. I'm
Trying
going
to
to
get
let
the
him
mayor to
speak
his
on,
granddaughter.
I'm going to let him speak on his issues.
Take your time, Keith.
Keith?
We're good.
Somebody said you had to leave early too.
I set it up for you now.
Not me. I got all day, man. Let's open it up.
Ready?
Talk fast.
Talk fast, okay. Well, I won't be near as long as Jamie and Cindy usually talk, so I'll make mine briefer.
Cindy.
More brief. As part of our city code outline 78-119, we're supposed to abide by our tech specs and design criteria for public improvements. On page 3 of our tech specs, the fees that are involved there are water lines 4%, sewers, and it doesn't state sanitary or storm sewers. So I'm assuming it's sanitary, 2%, streets are 3%. And when I say 3, if we revise this and decide to start enforcing it, I would make that more clear for the storm sewers, because streets and storm sewers kind of go together. You got to have curb inlets, underground structures, or ditches, whatever, you know. So, but there's a total of 9% of fees there that have never been collected in the lifetime that I've been here, or my predecessor. I called David and talked to him personally, and he said they was never enforced all the 30 years he was here, these fees for public
So
improvement.
this is 40 years or older? Okay.
Yeah, so, but for example, if you take a $5 million subdivision improvement project, as storm sewers, sanitary, water lines, streets, and you pay 9% fees on those improvements, you know, 9% of 5 million, that's what, $450,000 in fees that we've never collected for public improvements. And I know back in the 90s, I'd done a lot of the design around here,
Wow.
you know, for the sewers and water lines and the streets and stuff. But those have never been collected. So we can either leave it like this and start enforcing it immediately, or we could ax them out, or, you know, it's whatever you all desires are. It's something we need to look at, though.
So Jamie, without a calculator, if we went back 40 years and charged all these fees, we would balance our budget.
Probably 2 times.
3,000.
Yep.
So on a development like that, when you say what is the city's involvement for that 9%? What are they?
Okay, what we're doing with that money, when I was in the city of Springfield, our fees were 5% of construction costs. We would get a written document from, for example, Tom Boyce Excavated. He would give John Doe, the developer, a cost to build all this infrastructure for him. We would look at that and say, okay, well, are these, you know, kosher? Are they good numbers, or are they just throwing in a low number there to pay a low fee on, you know? So we would look at that and say, okay, can we go out and build it for that if we had to, less the, you know, the wage rates and stuff, not have to pay prevailing wage. But we would look at their estimate and see, and if it was okay, they would come in, pay the fees, and ours up there were 5%, 0.5% for engineering to review the plans and look at them, and 4.5% for the inspection side of it. We'd go out and put an inspector out there in the field with the developer to, when they started putting stuff in, to make sure they had proper bedding around the water and the sewer, they had proper base material under the streets, curb and gutter was built properly, things like that. So that would pay, you know, the salaries of a couple inspectors usually.
So there is some hard costs, and then you're not getting any revenue for it.
Correct.
And that's basically just a few inspectors and stuff, or?
Correct. Yep.
Keith, could I?
Yes, sir.
Something that you just triggered in my mind. One of the problems that we have around here is stormwater.
Big
Right?
time.
So if we would have been collecting this, could this have helped with some of that
Oh, yeah,
stormwater
yeah.
runoff issue?
Yep. And another thing we done at Springfield, we would have a detention buyout, it was called. And if a development went in, if it was next to Lake Taneycomo, just running right into the lake, you know, they wouldn't have to build detention, but they would pay a buyout amount, it was called, on the volume of detention they were buying out. And every part of this city has a watershed, so to speak. That money would go into that watershed to build public improvements, storm sewers in that watershed, is the way that would work. But we don't do that here.
But right now, when there is a development, isn't each parcel responsible for retaining their own stormwater?
Usually, unless it's got a master, so to speak, detention basin, you know, or it's total development. For example, Branson Hills out there, it's got one big detention basin out there.
Yeah.
Or I guess it's got two or three, really,
Yeah.
but that everything drains into.
Let's go back a few years, Lakewood Estates, all their drains drain right directly into Table Rock Lake. If that was being built now, what would be the
Taneycomo?
scenario? Yeah, sorry, Taneycomo.
I
What
say
would be the scenario now if something like that went in?
If
on the
something like
shores?
that went in, they would put their own infrastructure in. If it was private, like Lakewood Estates is, they would put their own stuff in like that. But according to the code, everything has to be built to city public improvement standards right now. So if you build a private street, you have to still build it to the city standards, whether it's a private street or a public street.
Could they still discharge like Lakewood Estates is doing now?
Sure, yeah.
That's what I was right there.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Right now, it goes into an undersized system for that particular area.
I would say so. It was boiling out that undersized
Yeah.
system last time I saw
Yeah.
it.
Yep. So anyway, that's something we need to look at. We either cross it out, don't ever enforce it, or we start enforcing it, or look at a different amount of fees, you know, instead of the 9%, scale it back to half of that or whatever.
I would encourage the same request we made for Jamie, for you, study this. One thing different on this that's somewhat concerning is we really want to be cautious of how much we're charging developers or home builders, and, because, I
Don't
mean,
want to make it excessive.
right now, their fees are pretty stout, so I know we're on that balancing line, city needs the revenue. So would you mind providing some clarity, maybe some suggestions of
Sure.
X this out, but here, let's replace it with,
And we've got a lot of updates to make to our design standards and tech specs for the stormwater detention, for example, is one that we need to get rolled out as soon as we can get it done to start requiring a 100-year detention basin instead of just for a 25-year. That's what we're
Yeah.
currently working on. That'll be one of our first rollouts.
Mayor, I got a question for the attorney. We have a code on the book, and we're not enforcing it. Do we have to take some sort of action in the city council meeting to put this on hold?
You don't have to do anything today if you want the current practice to continue. You could direct them to begin enforcing it, but they can continue to not enforce it and not collect that fee right now.
Thank you.
and I think that's what I heard the board say, right? We're in agreement with that.
Thank you to the board for saying that, because that's been my struggle. When I heard about this, that's why I wanted it brought to you, but it just didn't feel right to try to simply enforce it.
Yeah, and I compliment Keith and Jamie, whoever's coming up with going through and finding these issues with our codes. I have to believe, especially with some of the ones that have been on the books forever, is to discover those, and it'll be a combination of cleaning them up and in some areas increasing revenues to the city, right? Is there anything else?
Mr. Mayor, we're
Is there-
going to ask for some feedback from any of the developers on the interim to
Oh,
come before us.
well, I would, Keith, will you be reaching out to developers to get some input?
We can put something on our website, you know.
Oh,
and-
good idea.
And Melody could help with that, and, you know, John's pretty good at stuff like that, too, to
Very
put something
nice.
out there to get feedback on that, things like that. Because it will be a cost for a developer to go from a 25-year basin to a 100-year detention basin.
You bet.
You're taking up more real estate, which is costly around here.
But I think everybody acknowledges our stormwater is a real issue.
It's behind times. Yes,
Yeah.
sir. Yep, okay.
Is there anybody in the audience that wants to share something? Hearing that, any other comments from members of the board? Hearing none, accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
And third.
And third, all in favor, say aye.